wishing everyone a wonderful day. Hope everything has been going your way so far. And I'm thrilled to be doing another webinar with KnowledgeLeader. I've actually lost count of the number that we've done in the past, but this particular one, this 10 tips for making high-impact presentations, I think this topic is just such an important one. We make presentations all the time, and our ability to communicate really enhances or detracts from others' image of us. And while it might sound a little shallow, perception does matter, and in a lot of cases, perception is reality. So during the next 55 minutes, well, actually maybe 50, because I will be allowing time for questions at the end, hopefully I will provide at least one or two practical tips, or maybe it's not a novel tip, but maybe it's a twist on an existing practice that you're using that will enrich your ability and add a lot of value to your presentations. So for those of you that don't know me, I have been doing this for a little while. I'm so fortunate. I have a career that spans a little over 30 years. Can you stand it? Can you stand it? It's also a little humbling, a little depressing at the same time. During my career, I've had the opportunity of doing cable TV shows for the American Bankers Association. I've hosted a radio show, a business-oriented radio show in the past. And as some of you know, I deliver talks regularly at conferences like the IAA conferences and also in-house training programs. So literally, my life is just about all things making presentations. So I have a variety of perspectives, and most importantly, I think, I've had the opportunity to consider the internal auditor's role when making presentations. As some of you might know, I am a former audit committee chair, so I've watched a number of presentations, and most of them have been really good. Every once in a while, it's like, oh my goodness, how sad, how sad. And sometimes I think we learn a little bit more from the presentations that were a little wobbly, that weren't as powerful. And what I'm looking to do with you over the next 50 or so minutes is cull from that experience some techniques that, if you use them, will enable you to deliver high-impact, cogent presentations. So I'm just trying to think about what else I should tell you about me. Maybe I should tell you that one of the focal points in our work is change, making change happen, making it happen at an organizational level, and making change happen at an individual level. And so as we go through this webinar, I would really urge you to think about feedback that you've received from your clients, from your manager, maybe from team members. What do you do well when you present? What areas are a little soft, underbelly in your presentation style? And then listen with a third ear so that you can focus in on a technique or two that will definitely help you create some positive change, because that's really the thrust of everything. The scope today, let's talk about the scope. I wanted to focus on three areas. I wanted to spend a little time just establishing the context for today's topic. Lark mentioned the survey, and we definitely focused on that and leveraged the survey information. Clearly, presentation skills is something that's very, very important. And parenthetically, making presentations is something that not everyone is really comfortable doing. So we make a lot of presentations in audit. I do want to just touch on that, touch on the types of presentations. And then I think we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about specific techniques for either planning your message or for delivering with confidence, with conviction, and with tact. So I think to set the context, I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is just how important is the ability to present. If you had to stack this competency up against technical expertise, being a center of expertise in either internal auditing or compliance or operational risk management, how important is it to be able to communicate? And I would say to you, from my perspective, my opinion, being able to present, I think, is just absolutely huge, absolutely huge. Two auditors standing side by side, both with the same educational background, both with the same type of work experience, all things being equal, the opportunities, in my experience, I've watched, they've gone to the auditor who can present. They've gone to the auditor who can deliver difficult news, because not all the news we have to share is all wine and roses. It's not all wonderful. The opportunities go to the person who can present in an organized way. So I really think that when we're starting to plan a presentation, we should begin with the end in mind. So focusing on how will people be different as a result of this particular meeting that we're having with them. What do you want people to do or to do differently as a result of the teleconference you've got scheduled, the kickoff meeting that you've got planned, the status meeting that you're going to convey, and then begin to use that as the context for planning what you are going to cover. I also think we need to think about, and don't laugh, think about the risk, the consequences when we are misunderstood. Think about what happens. I'm just stopping to think, and I think about the time that I've wasted, the time that other people have wasted, because the message was just not understood the way it was intended. So now I'm thinking that many of you are interested not only in what I have to say, but you do want the CPE credits. So we're going to have our first poll slide. And the question is, what types of presentations do you typically deliver? So as you look at the choices, do you have to present at opening meetings? Make that choice. Status meetings? Do you have to present at closing meetings? Do you have to present at all of them? Just make your choice, and then we'll see what the totals turned out to be. So I'm just going to give you just about a minute or so, not even, to make your choices. And let's just see. Just giving it another couple of seconds. And let's see what we get. Look at this. Overwhelmingly, almost 83% of you participating have to present at all three meetings, which is kind of what I suspected. So that means that you get the joy of the opening meeting, you get the status meetings where there might be some tough news, and you get the joy of closing everything down. Now, in case you were wondering, is there a right answer for this particular polling slide? The answer is no. There's no right or wrong answer. The responses, I think, just really underscore the criticality of this competency. It is showing up continually in the audit. And by the way, this particular polling slide was getting you to think about the auditee. Also think about the number of times you have to communicate with audit management, you have to communicate with the auditors that are on the assignment. I mean, we are using this competency all the time, absolutely all the time. When I started to think about the types of presentations that auditors have to make, I came up with the list that you're now looking at. I just followed the life cycle of an audit and said, okay, we've got kickoff meetings. We've got kickoff meetings with the team. We've got kickoff meetings with the client. We've got status reports with the team, with audit management. We've got status reports with the client. Some of you might have to deliver internal training sessions. You might be in an organization where if you attend a webinar, if you attend a conference, the expectation is that you'll return to the organization and share what you learned. If you have a technical expertise, you might be tapped to train others so that they can learn from you. You might, depending on your responsibilities within the department, need to present at C-suite meetings, meaning you're with the CFO, the CIO. You might be presenting to the CEO. You might be presenting at the board. Different types of presentations, different type of audience. And then, of course, there's always the staff meetings. Each of these presentations require the ability to communicate with tact, diplomacy, and conviction. So my intent is to share a couple of techniques with you during the remainder of this webinar that will enable you to deliver clear, compelling messages just like a pro. So I think it might be interesting to have another polling slide. Now, I'm asking you to think, what is the greatest fear that most people have? Is it the fear of dying? Is it the fear of going to the dentist? Is it the fear of public speaking? Maybe you have no idea. Just make your choice and just give it a little time, and then we'll look to see what you have come up with. So I'm just going to give it another couple of seconds because this isn't really a tough question. I just want to make sure you get your CPE credit. And let's see what the answer turned out to be. Well, very educated audience, fear of public speaking. It's really true. They're more afraid, most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. Can you stand it? Obviously, the fear of going to a dentist, that does not speak well for anyone who is a dentist. Probably the profession needs a little marketing. But truly, the correct answer was fear of public speaking. And for some people, it really can be just so paralyzing. So let's focus on a couple of techniques to make that fear go away. Now, please don't laugh at what you're looking at, but truly, if someone asks you to speak, the best thing that you can do is speak about something that you know, and speak about something that you know very, very, very well. So right out of the gate, being able to conduct an opening meeting, a status meeting, closing conference, speaking at an audit committee meeting, speak about something you know. Also, it helps to be prepared. Sometimes words look fantastic, ink on paper, and then you go to say them, and it feels like you have a ton of marbles in your mouth. Organize your thoughts. If you need to rehearse, rehearse. The more important the meeting, the more visible the meeting, the bigger the consequence of the meeting. Let's face it, practice. Practice. Organize your ideas so that there is some flow. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I think the most important thing, counterintuitively, is the last thing on this slide. Know your goal. I mentioned this earlier, but really clearly articulate your objective. How do you want your listener to be different or changed? What action do you want them to take? What decision do you want them to make? So the second technique is related to this, in that in order for you to do a really good job of creating a call to action with your presentation, you need to know your audience. If you don't know your audience, then you really have a very vague target. You're not sure what their informational needs are. I think you really need to understand how experienced are they. You know, I am getting ready to deliver a couple of presentations at an in-house conference for one of my clients, and we're collaborating in planning this event. So initially, we were looking to invite folks from middle management up to the senior echelons within this division. But as we started to plan it, we started to realize, oh no, that's not going to happen. We're only going to have the senior execs. So first of all, the size of the audience is cut almost in half, a little bit more than in half. Second of all, the informational needs have now changed dramatically. Because we're focusing exclusively on a senior audience, some of the things that we were planning on doing need to change. Now, while the whole activity might not change, the way we do it will need to change. And that's because of the audience's familiarity with the subject matter. I think another thing you need to think about very honestly, very, very honestly, is how favorably or unfavorably disposed are they to your message. If they're favorably disposed, you won't have to spend the same amount of time trying to persuade them. In fact, spending a lot of time trying to persuade them is really a waste of time and could be an irritant because they're thinking, we know this, we agree, keep going, move on. If, on the other hand, you know that your audience is uninformed, meaning what you want to talk to them about is something that they know nothing about, you're going to have to proceed more slowly because your primary role will be education. Finally, if you know that your audience is negatively or neutrally predisposed to your message, I would spend a lot of time in the preparation phase anticipating their possible reactions. What are they going to say? What might they object to specifically? How are you going to overcome those objections? So we're just talking about goals, and I think that it's time for another poll slide. This is the third one. And get your thoughts together here. What are you typically trying to achieve as a result of your presentation? Are you trying to inform, giving people information? Are you trying to persuade them or motivate them or sell them into taking some action? Or are you trying to educate them or train them? So I'm just going to give you a minute or two just to get your answers together. And we'll take a look at what your thoughts are. So let's see. Let's just see what this looks like. So interestingly enough, half of you, your typical goal is to inform. For a third of you, your goal is to persuade or motivate. And for the remainder of you, it's education or training. So a lot of times you're giving information. What I would say to you is, regardless of your presentation's purpose, I think there's one vital question that you need to answer during your planning. It's probably the most important question when you're planning, and that is, what is in it for the audience? So as you're trying to determine your presentation's purpose, and you're thinking about how much time they've given you, who the audience is, the vital question is the question that will be going through their mind as they are listening to you. They're going to be sitting there thinking, so what's in it for me? So how does this touch my life? How does this affect my department? How will this affect my schedule? If you can answer that question right from the onset, you will have captured your audience's attention. If you can, right in your opening remarks, let them know what they're going to take away as a result of this meeting, you will have captured their attention. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, talking about the audience and the audience's needs. I have noticed that frequently the audience members are analytical thinkers. They're very, very detailed, concrete, sequential thinkers. Consequently, the logical sequencing of your ideas is critical. It's really, really critical. If you present ideas that they perceive to be out of order or worse, in an order that makes no sense to them, that's going to really create problems. And they won't have the problem. They'll just blame you. They'll just attribute it to you're not clear. I think it's also important when you're dealing with analytical speakers who are careful thinkers to speak slowly and clearly and to avoid the use of red flag words like always and never. The minute in my experience, the minute an analytical thinker hears the word always or never, while it looks like they are continuing to listen to you, they've actually stopped. And now they're thinking, gee, was there ever a case where that happened? You know, Anne said never. Was there really never? There had to have been a case. And they will grind on this and grind on this until they come up with an example. Generally, about 20 minutes later, when you've moved on, you're 3 topics down into your agenda, you've completely forgotten that you ever even said always and never. And that's their question. Their question, because it's coming so out of sequence from your perspective, you've moved on, it's likely to throw you off, and we could see an erosion in confidence. So avoid all of that. Avoid all of that. My 4th tip is organize your message. Make sure there is a distinct beginning, middle, and an end. I don't know if this is true for you. For me, I might have a series of meetings during a project. At every meeting, we might have different people. So I don't know if you watch TV, but if you ever watch episodic TV, when you start the TV show, they give you a fast recap on what's happened earlier in the season so that you don't feel out of sorts and you can begin to process what they want to tell you in the current episode. Similarly, your meetings, once the audit kicks off, should have a beginning, middle, and an end so that people understand where things left off at the prior meeting, the purpose of this meeting, how they're supposed to be different, and then proceed to cover in the middle of your meeting whatever your current topic is. At the end of the meeting, be sure to recap who's doing what, when, what are the next steps, when's the next meeting. Now, let me just give you an acid test for organizing your message. If you cannot recall the order of the topics that you want to cover, it's your meeting, it's your teleconference. If you can't remember it, then that order is not going to be impactful or memorable for your participants. So start to get some kind of a logic trail. So let me give you a couple of ideas for organizing your message. Follow a chronology. Pretty easy. In the past there was, now there is, in the future there will be. That's one chronology. Now, by the way, these methods of organizing will depend on your topic, will depend on the situation, will depend on the audience, but I just think that we need some kind of logical thread that is going to help us group the topics in a way that is most impactful, useful, and memorable for the participants. There's a technique called tell 'em, and tell 'em again. And the repetition is intentional. Psychologists have found that when people hear things multiple times, minimum of 3 times, it takes hold. I guess you could say this is the underpinning for advertisements. You know, spaced repetition, spaced repetition. When you see the method, tell 'em, and tell 'em again, what this is referring to is when you are doing your opening remarks, you give them an overview of what you're going to talk about. For instance, in this webinar, I said we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about the value of speaking in audit. We're going to talk about tips for planning your message. And we're going to talk about tips for designing your message. That was in my opening. I then talked to you about the context. We are now currently talking about the techniques for planning, and we'll get to the delivery techniques in just a little bit. So I'm in that second tell 'em. At the end of this presentation, we'll do a fast recap, and that'll be the final tell 'em. That final tell 'em is intended to anchor the key points in people's mind. So these are just a couple of ways that you can begin to organize your thoughts. One other technique, and this will be my 5th technique for you, I think it's hugely important that you plan your transitions, your segues, in detail. Now, what's a transition? A transition is the movement from one topic to another topic in your presentation? How are you going to get from one topic to another topic? If you're not clear on that, that will detract from the organization of your message. Also, just by the way, if you are prone to pausing audibly, the audibles uptick when you are unsure of your transition. So it might be helpful to not only plan your transitions, but somewhere where you can see it on your notes, because I'm assuming we all come to meetings with notes. I can't even imagine coming to a meeting without notes. You can easily see your transitions so that you can confidently segue from one topic to another. Sometimes the transition is no transition, meaning sometimes it's just as simple as, so we finished that topic. Is there anything else on that topic? Otherwise, we're going to talk about something else. Okay? That's a very clear transition. We're closing one thing down, and we're moving into another. But definitely give consideration to your word choice and have that noted someplace obviously so that you can refer to it with ease. So I think it's time for another polling question. So when you present, what are you doing? Are you typically standing, seated at a small table talking to a couple of people, seated at a large table, talking to 8 or more people, delivering your message by phone, or delivering your message by video conference? So I'll just give you a couple of seconds there to get your thoughts together.
And this is Lark. Well, while people are are answering the polls, I have a related question for you if you want to answer it.
Sure.
Okay. One person did ask, I am quite comfortable talking to people, just one problem. I'm a whiteboard person and not a person who can sit and talk and present. How can I get over that? Would it be rude to stand up and talk?
So if you're a whiteboard person, I would have to say, what is it that you are presenting? If you're presenting something that deals with a process flow or deals with data exchange or deals with infrastructure, something that would be helped by having a visual, then a whiteboard is great. The cautionary note, though, is be careful that you do not completely break eye contact with your audience as you're using the whiteboard. Because if you do that, you could get so consumed in what you're diagramming that they now get bored. So I think that, summing up my answer, I think we have to ask the question, why are we whiteboarding? Is it to help you or is it to help them? Why are we whiteboarding in the meeting? Is this a meeting where you're collecting information? Is this a meeting where you're giving information? If you're giving information, then I would say have the diagram as part of your material, as part of your handouts. And the other part of my answer, just to repeat it, is make sure that you don't break eye contact, severing it, getting so consumed in what you're whiteboarding that you completely lose your audience. So let's say, while I was giving that answer, so let's see, this is interesting. About 20% of you present standing, and almost 40% you're seated with talking to just a couple of people. About 30% are seated at a large table addressing 8 or more, and just 7% are delivering your message by phone, and almost 2% is delivering your message by video conference. So the people who are presenting and they're standing, they're to be commended, because standing gives you the best opportunity to project, the best visibility of the audience, and they get the best visibility of you. It makes it easier for you to get your point across and be heard. But I completely understand that when it's just a couple of people, you don't want to look pretentious. It's you meeting with 2 people. How ridiculous if you're standing up. So that's small group presenting. The large table, when you're presenting to 8 or more people, I think you need to think about the shape of the table and the size of the room. If it's your traditional board conference room and you've got 10 people on the long sides, they're going to have a hard time seeing you. You might want to consider standing in place when you're at a large, long board table. I have found that if people cannot see and hear you, they might ask you once, could you please speak up? And then after that, they just tune out. So I think that the standing to be commended if you normally present and you're standing up. The reason I asked you about your body position is because it takes me to my sixth technique, which is watch your posture. Watch your posture. You know, recently I was at a meeting, and it was a CSA type meeting, a control self-assessment type meeting. So there were probably about 10 people, and I was facilitating the meeting, so I'm asking the questions about the process and the risks, and I'm trying to pull this information from the attendees. And one of the attendees had gotten so engrossed in the conversation. Now, if you can imagine a U-shaped room, you can all imagine a U, and the flat bottom part of the U was the part that was opposite me. I'm at the front of the room, and that's opposite me at the back of the room. So this individual that I'm describing to you was watching the conversation like the person was watching a tennis match, first looking to the right, then looking to the left, then looking to the right, then looking to the left, as the conversation's going. The person got so engrossed in the conversation that this individual completely forgot to watch her body positioning. And I noticed all of this because the image that struck me was, here is this person sitting way back in her chair, and it was one of these swivel chairs with arms and a back that kind of reclines. So the person, if you can imagine, legs splayed open, leaning back in the chair, mouth slightly agape as the person is watching this verbal tennis match. Not exactly a flattering posture. There will be times that people will present, they don't realize they're swiveling. I mean, it looks like they are spinning in their chairs. So I think that you have to figure out what your stance of excellence is. Now, by stance of excellence, that's a technical term. That means, where was your body the last time you presented successfully at a meeting? Typically, from a behavioral perspective, stances of excellence include leaning forward, not like you're lurking over somebody like a vulture, but more that your body language is tilted in. Psychologically, this displays interest. Typically, stance of excellence includes, if you're seated, hands and arms in plain view as opposed to under the table. Hands and arms under the table conveys a nonverbal message that you're withholding. Stance of excellence typically also includes having your rear end on the front third of your seat, so that forces your weight to your knees and feet. It forces your body, your back and neck into a more upright position, which gives you an image of confidence. So do think about what your body positioning is saying about you. If you happen to feel very comfortable with your back pressed up against the back of your seat, sitting deep in your chair, with a slightly rounded back, I have to tell you, you're probably working way too hard to project your voice, way too hard. Because what you're actually doing is compressing your lungs. You're making it really, really difficult. Also, if you sit all the way back in your chair, there's a tendency to give a hunched over look to the people who are meeting with you. And again, all of this happens so quickly, it takes me longer to explain it than it actually does to occur, but it all gets weighed on the scale of public opinion concerning you and your executive presence, concerning you and your presentation. Now, as we're talking about body positioning and being heard, I would be really, really, really remiss if I didn't talk about audible pauses. Now, some people, when they present, I mentioned this earlier, they will use fillers, audible pauses, every time. Other people are a little bit more upend about it. They'll use audible pauses and fillers that are a little bit more upscale. They'll say things like you know, like you know. Some people will use fillers that are sayings. For example, at the end of the day. At the end of the day. Some of you know this. The first time I heard that expression, I thought the speaker was being literal. And I was really getting nervous because it was a project kickoff, and we had a ton of stuff to do. And I'm thinking, at the end of the day, we're getting all of this done? How is this going to be possible? And then it hit me. Oh, at the end of the day. It's not a real day. Boy, was I relieved. The deal here, how do you get rid of these fillers, is to pause and breathe at the end of your sentence. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago, if you know what your transition is, you are prepared. If you're prepared, you don't need to pause and say because you'll pause and you'll know what your transition is. These audible pauses and fillers come out because our brain and mouth get out of sync. If you know what your transitions are, that's one sub-technique for eliminating them. The other technique would be to slow your rate of speech down, giving your brain and your mouth time to stay connected as you think about where you need to go next in your presentation. Now, for those of you who are speed demons, and there is a part of me that's like that, I think, okay, we've got to go. I can't pause. We only have 15 minutes. We only have 30 minutes. I can't waste time. Let's go. Let me just say that your audience is listening to what you're saying. They're not clairvoyant. They're not that anticipatory, meaning you make your message, they process it. They have to think about it. The fact that you are pausing, you're actually helping your audience because you're giving them process time. You're actually giving them time to think and reflect. The other thing I would say to the speed demons like me in the group, if you have an analytical audience, concrete sequential audience, they process slowly, carefully, and thoroughly. They appreciate the think time. So you pause, it helps you. You keep your brain and your mouth in sync, it helps them. They get to really think about your message, and they might have some questions. And then you can have a conversation. So that's about the pauses, pausing and breathing. My eighth technique, I think it's really important to start and end on time, especially these days. People are stacked and racked with their schedule. People have meetings from 12 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. I don't know how they're getting from one spot to another. I'm really not sure. It's easier to do with a teleconference. But be that as it may, I think it's respectful to begin and end on time. Now, a couple of techniques for doing this. I do think we need to do the math. If somebody says to you, okay, we have 30 minutes. We can have a status meeting for this audit. We have 30 minutes available. I mentioned earlier that every meeting needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Part of the beginning is the ice break, the greeting, depending on how well you know the team. Part of the end is the wrap-up, who's doing what, when, what's next. In between is the middle. Now, if you use your imagination and you think, I have 30 minutes, setting the stage, depending on how complex the stage is, what we need to review, that could take 5 minutes. That could take 10 minutes. Wrapping up, depending on what the open items are that we need to discuss, the complexity of those items, that wrap-up might be 2 minutes. That wrap-up might be 10 minutes. Well, if your start and your end are 10 minutes each, that's already 20 minutes. What can you plan to cover that will fit comfortably into the remaining 10 minutes of your 30-minute schedule? So this is why I'm saying do the math. Now you might say, hey, Ann, but they're only giving me 30 minutes. I've really got to rush through things. And I would say, I think you might have an option, maybe. The option might be when you're setting up the meeting to give the person a preview of what you want to cover so that now they feel some autonomy in scheduling the meeting. And once you go through at a high level what you want to talk about, they might say to you, okay, clearly we need more than 30 minutes, but 30 minutes is all we have now. Let's start, and we'll set up a couple of other meetings. So just some thoughts on the scheduling. I think it's important. I want to switch to a polling slide here. I want to switch the topic up. We haven't talked yet about handouts. Handouts, things that you distribute during a meeting. So what are they? Are they typically examples of test results? Are they typically flowcharts? Are they agendas? Are they a combination of the first three? Or don't you typically use them?
And Anne, while we wait for the audience to answer, we did have an interesting question that I thought I might throw out to you right now while people are answering. The question was, what suggestions do you have for a person making a presentation in a different language that is not his or her official language?
I have been there. That question just takes me back to Paris during SOX training, and it was an interesting situation because in the preparation I was told that everyone spoke English, and the morning of the presentation, as I'm waiting in the lobby, my audit contact meets me, and I overhear my audit contact talking to the site contact in French, and it was clear what they were saying to each other was, oh no, Anne has to speak French because this audience does not speak English that well or at all. And I thought, oh my goodness. So here's what worked for me. Simplify, simplify, simplify. I have a habit. I'm not saying it's a great habit. It's actually not a great habit when you're dealing with a multilingual crowd. I will use idiomatic expressions. Not good. Eliminate them. Just eliminate them. Simplify everything. Eliminate unnecessary adjectives. Eliminate unnecessary adverbs. Pare the presentation down. That's the first technique. The second technique is to repeat the important parts because you are saying them, you don't have the vocabulary that they have. As you're repeating them, allow more time for questions. I also found it helpful to use examples that they could relate to take an example so that they could see what I was talking about and how it applied to them. So I would simplify, I would slow down, I would use examples. Also, it goes without saying, but I do need to say it, I wish I would have had more practice time because it had been a while, and my French is not what it used to be when I was in school. So let's see what the polling results were. It looks like almost 60% of you use some combination of test results, flowcharts, and an agenda. I was pleased to see, by the way, that over 20% of you use agendas. I do think agendas are fabulous. I think psychologically they give the other party, the people with whom you are meeting, a sense of you as the prepared person. It gives them a sense of control because they see where the meeting is going as opposed to it's just a conversation. I wanted to talk about handouts just for a little bit because I think that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's an example, by the way, of one of those hackneyed expressions that may or may not translate. I also think that if you have a multi-page handout, please take the time to put page numbers on it. It works so well because this way, as you're referring to the handout, especially if you're in that group of 8 or more, when you're in a large group, people process information at different times. You might say to a person, we're going to move through the handout page by page, and there's already at least 2 people who have worked their way through the whole thing, or they're studiously examining one page. So by having page numbers, you can easily say, and I'm on page 2, or at the top of page 3, and it just makes it so much easier. If you've ever given a presentation and all you hear are the rustling of pages, particularly on teleconferences, having page numbers on the documents makes it just so much easier so that you can say, if we could now turn to and then fill in the page number, it's absolutely, it's just a wonderful thing. It's absolutely a wonderful thing. Now, I need to say one caveat with the handouts. Yes, it takes time to put it together. It absolutely takes time to put it together. However, when you start to see ink on paper, for instance, you're putting an agenda together, what do I want to cover? The ink on paper will clarify your thinking. Earlier I gave you the tip about starting and ending on time and doing the math. Well, when you see the ink on paper, you want to cover 8 items, then that makes it so much easier to do the math. I have 60 minutes. Well, I have enough time to get through these 8 items, plus an opening, plus a wrap-up. That's 10 items. That's an average of 6 minutes a topic. Is that doable? Now, maybe it is, folks. Maybe it is. You know, if you're giving people good news, that typically moves pretty smoothly. It's when we have to talk about deficiencies, when we have to talk about controls that are not well designed, when we have to talk about risk ratings and they might not agree with our risk ratings, that things become a little bit difficult. I think it's important in terms of confidence, self-confidence, to plan cushions. So if I know that I have some difficult news to convey or to discuss, then I plan extra time around that topic. But use the handouts, especially the agenda ones, to organize your thoughts. So the 10th topic, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left in this webinar, and I said that I would allow some time for questions. In my opening remarks, I hoped that you would find 1 or 2 techniques that would take your game to the next level. And I want to remind you that everything that I have mentioned so far is a behavior. So if there is a technique that you heard me describe and you thought, oh, wow, I'd like to try that, or let me give that a shot, all you have to do is focus on using that technique for 30 consecutive days. Now, if I were you, let's say it's audibles, because frequently the people that I want to work with, not that I want to work with, that I am working with, audibles are the thing that they know detracts from their presentation. They know it. They hear it. They've gotten feedback. So let's say that you want to work on that. What I would suggest that you do is with everyone with whom you come in contact. That means your friends, your kids, your spouse, everyone, every conversation, phone conversations, casual conversations, meetings, every time you speak, work on pausing and breathing. Pausing and breathing. Work on slowing your rate of speech, especially when you are coming to the end of a sentence or you are coming to the end of a topic or a thought or an idea. If you practice that for 30 days, you will own that behavior. You won't have to worry about it. It will automatically be part of your behavioral repertoire. The key to all of this is a couple of things. Choose wisely. I generally advise people to choose techniques, to choose behaviors that will give them a highly leveraged result, meaning you make this one change and it's going to create other improvements just as a result of making this one change. So now in audit terms, I would choose behaviors that address the root cause of my issue. Isn't that a novel thought? Because if I can address the root cause behavior, I'll get improvements in other places. So I think it's important to think about and really write out what you want to focus on, because writing clarifies thought. I mentioned that before when I talked about planning agendas. But it will also help you stay focused, because as you make this behavioral change, I do need to warn you, you will fall off the wagon. Okay, there's another expression. Meaning you will forget. You will pause audibly. Don't be upset. That's part of the change process. Just get back on that horse that threw you. Okay, another expression. Start again and keep working at it. My final technique, proper planning prevents problems. It's also very alliterative, but I really mean it. The subtext in everything that I've talked about today has gone back to you need to make the time to organize your thoughts. You need to make the time to think about your audience, to practice. You need to think through, where do you want to sit? How do you want to sit? You need to think about the rate of speech that you are using. You need to design your handouts and make those copies. And I recognize when you're on the road, it's not always easy to do. It's not always easy to find an available printer. I think it's really important with teleconferences that you send out your handouts well in advance of the teleconference, because not everybody goes into a teleconference with access to their emails. So if you've made an assumption that you can hit send 2 minutes before a teleconference and people will have that documentation, that's a terrible assumption. Even if some people are able to access the information, depending on how technical it is, depending on how complicated it is, some people like to print it off so that they can study it, they can write on it. So I really do feel that proper planning does prevent problems. So, Laura, I think we have about 5 minutes and counting, not even. Are there any questions that we should be discussing?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. We have a good starting question where one of our attendees asked, how do these tips change, if at all, when you're presenting to the audit committee, especially since they're not a group that likes repetition?
So the techniques are affected by your audience. All the I shouldn't say all the techniques. The techniques related to planning are directly affected by who the audience is, because that's going to drive the level of detail, the amount of that you need to provide, the amount of context that you need to provide. All audit committees are not the same. I think you need to think through who are the individuals on the audit committee, what's their background, depending on what it is that you are going to be talking about. You might have audit committee members who have been committee members at other organizations. They're very experienced in the topics that you're going to discuss. You might be auditing in an organization where the risk management practices are very robust at all levels within the organization. That's going to be a more sophisticated audience. You might be auditing in an organization where the risk management culture is a little undeveloped or a little nascent. And so you'll have to provide information initially more simplistically and keep it simple, focused on the key points that you want them to make or the key decisions that you want them to take.
Thank you for that answer, Anne. We have another very, very good question, and this person's asking, how do you manage the flow of a meeting and the time when one person in the room asks an excessive amount of questions and dominates the conversation?
So when we have someone who's very dominant, and I've been in that situation, I think, who is this person? I don't mean who is this person. I mean, who is this person? Is it the person that's responsible for the project? Is it the person who's the process owner? Is it a person who's just been told, if you don't master this topic, you're fired? Is this person asking the questions to hear themselves speak because they already know the answer and it's ego, or are they really asking because they really need the answer? The answer helps me figure out how I want to deal with them. The other thing I focus on is, what are the questions that they are asking? If the questions are relevant to everyone, maybe they just are a little bit more experienced, or maybe they are just a little bit more hands-on. If the questions are relevant to everyone, then I answer the questions. If the questions are questions that I'm definitely going to answer, and I have deliberately organized my presentation to cover these topics in a specific way, then I say to the individual, we're definitely going to cover that. and I have a plan to cover it in a way that will make the most sense. I just ask your patience. If, on the other hand, the person is asking very self-serving questions, meaning the answers only apply to their area or to the work that they are doing, then I say to the person, that really is just something that affects your department. You and I need to meet separately about that. And if it's something that I don't have the answer to, nobody in the answer has the answer to it, then I put it on a parking lot. Literally, if there's a whiteboard in the room, I write parking lot. If there's a flip chart in the room, I write parking lot on a white sheet, and I write their issue down so that they psychologically see that it's tangibly someplace. So those are just a couple of ways. It really depends, on who the person is, what level they are. I also forgot to tell you, if the person's the CEO, I just let it go. Just let it go.
Very good advice, Ann. Do you want to take one more question?
I think we can, if I make it a little short answer.
Okay. Well, this is one that applies to, I think, most of us, that we can all relate to it. What suggestions do you have for teleconferences, especially since you can't see the body language of the people on the phone?
The one thing about teleconferences is, as I said earlier, send the information out ahead. Then once you're in the teleconference, I would do a lot of polling periodically because I think sometimes that people drop off the call. I was just in a teleconference a couple of weeks ago where half the people dropped off. If it weren't for that little tone that you hear, it was just one of those things. But if you poll, meaning can we hear from New York, can we hear from Boston, can we hear from Singapore, can we hear from London regularly, and I would announce that you're going to do polling periodically when you're covering certain topics or you have certain questions so that people know to expect that. I would also cover information more slowly in a teleconference, and definitely have something for them to refer to. Otherwise, don't be surprised if they start playing solitaire on their computers.
Well, thank you for that advice, Ann. I think we are at the end of our time, so I want to thank everybody for attending today. We hope you got some good practical advice out of what Ann had to offer today. We do have an article on KnowledgeLeader that relates to this particular presentation, and we hope you all have a great day.